Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We'll be getting started in a moment. First, I'd like to go over a couple housekeeping items. We're recording today's webinar and we'll be making that available to you just in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with any of your colleagues. If you have any questions over the course of the presentation, please put them in the questions panel in your GoToWebinar box and we'll be sure to answer them after the demonstration. I'd also like to take a moment to introduce our presenters today. Today we've got David Knox, Account Manager at Agosto, with us, Matt Sack, Director of Partner Marketing at Virtu, as well as Trevor Foskett, Solutions Engineer here at Virtu. Today we'll be kicking things off by covering the top G Suite security, compliance, and data privacy concerns for the coming year and how powerful email protection can make it easier for you to securely share sensitive information in the cloud. We'll also be demonstrating how you can easily add additional layers of protection to your G Suite email to protect the emails and files you send no matter where they travel. I think we're all set. Take it away, David.
Thanks, Emily. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Knox, and I'm an account manager here at Agosto on the client success side. I'm excited to be here today with Matt and Trevor from Virtu. We worked with Virtu for several years, and they are a trusted vendor in our Select portfolio. Matt, Trevor, I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Awesome. Thanks, David. I appreciate everyone taking the time today to learn a bit more about email protection and compliance with us today. Our plan for this webinar is to start by talking about some of the common trends and requirements that we've been hearing from other IT leaders, specifically when it comes to email and G Suite. And then we're going to talk about some tactical ways where you can enhance your compliance posture via email protection in G Suite, followed up by an in-depth look at Virtu, which is Google's recommended product for data protection and email security. And we will also have a section for Q&As at the end of the demo. So I want to start by talking about a story that one of the IT leaders we spoke with a couple months ago was telling us, and we were talking with this CISO, and she was telling us a bit about her organization and how they have a lot of compliance needs and a lot of requirements for email protection. And this is a company that makes genetically modified meat substitutes. So on the surface, we expected that they probably had some of the same compliance requirements that every company has around HIPAA compliance for sharing employee health data, PCI data for financial information about customers, and GDPR. But as we started talking with the CISO, we uncovered a lot of other requirements for data protection, whether it was exchanging legal contracts, financial statements, product data, things of that nature. And so we were surprised to find out that this company that wasn't in a regulated industry actually had a lot of information that they needed to protect. And that story that we heard confirms some of the data that's out there. And I'm going to talk about some of this information gathered in a survey of 150 IT leaders conducted by Samsung and some other enterprises. And this first stat really jumped out to us, and it's that 73% of corporate data needs protection, according to most IT leaders. And if you look at this breakdown, I want you all to start thinking about the data that your organization is sharing. And most IT leaders understand that about 40% of their information is going to be regulated and going to require additional protection by law. But it's this 32% of corporates identify that information and how to protect it. So going into this, I just want you all to keep thinking about what is some of the data that you have today that your users are sharing that might require additional protection. So everyone's aware that their users are sharing a lot of data, but something that jumped out to us from this survey is that most data leaks are being caused by your own employees. And this is not necessarily malicious, but most of the tools that have been built today have been built to keep data inside of your organization. And a lot of the sensitive information that you need to share, whether it's vendor contracts or projects you're working on with external partners, that data needs to leave your organization. And because most tools aren't built to enable safe external sharing, a lot of end users are circumventing the security tools that are already in place and sharing this data unprotected. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of data breaches and leaks being caused simply by employees who are not sharing data properly or securely outside of the organization. And one thing we also hear from a lot of IT leaders is that there's a short attention span when it comes to the apps and different environments where organizations are focusing their security efforts. And despite all of the new tools that continue to come out for collaboration and chatting and sharing data, the reality is most data leaks still occur in email. So email has been around longer than a lot of these new tools for communication, but it's still the focal point of a lot of these data breaches. And so one thing we're hearing from a lot of folks is that they are diverting their focus back to email. As you can see here, 28% of data leaks are occurring from email attacks. So 4 times as many attacks are coming from email as opposed to some other application or system that a hacker gets into. So email has been around a long time, and it's still a very, very vulnerable place in most organizations. And so there's a lot of awareness around email's vulnerabilities, but there's not a lot being done by organizations to actually solve these problems. Only 40% of the organizations we spoke with had any sort of enhanced encryption or protection for email. And the reason why is pretty simple. Most of the solutions that have been out there are simply too difficult for people to use. As you can see here, complexity was overwhelmingly the top reason why a lot of these IT leaders don't have sufficient email protection in place. And our goal for this discussion is to help you understand what you need to make sure your protection is sufficient, and to show you some ways that this can be added in a really, really seamless fashion that integrates directly with your existing G Suite tools. One very relevant case in point around how this complexity is weakening existing email protection tools. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with PGP or SMIME, but these are methods for email encryption that have been around for decades. And they've always been very, very difficult to use. That's why a lot of organizations haven't really effectively rolled them out. And just last month, there was a vulnerability discovered in PGP and SMIME called eFail. And I won't get into the nitty-gritty on this call, but effectively, there was a lack of integrity checks built into a lot of the instances of PGP and SMIME. And what this really led to is that a lot of content that organizations thought was encrypted was actually being revealed unencrypted. And the reason why this issue occurred is because most of the configurations of SMIME and PGP out there were too difficult for IT administrators and end users to actually understand. So they weren't able to realize that this vulnerability existed. So this is one of many, many instances where existing email solutions are not working. And so we're excited to show you how Virtu helps remediate some of these problems. So I want to start by talking about, when we're talking about compliance for email protection, talking about something that's really top of mind for everyone out there, and that's GDPR. And I encourage you all, when I'm talking about GDPR throughout this presentation, think of GDPR as an opportunity to sharpen up and optimize all of your security processes across the board. Because the feedback that we're getting from privacy experts out there and security leaders is that they think GDPR as a regulation is really going to shape and guide the direction of all other security policies and regulations that are going to follow. So just quick summary, I'm sure you all have been beaten to death with information about GDPR in the past few months, but GDPR is a data protection requirement that originated in the European Union. However, it impacts many, many organizations, and it impacts most organizations around the globe, regardless of whether or not they're based in Europe. And the reason why is that GDPR applies to any organization, that collects data on European citizens or does business with European companies. So there's a good chance that that impacts most people on this call. So that's why this is such a relevant regulation that you're hearing so much about, even though you may not be based in Europe. Another reason why you're hearing a lot about GDPR is because the ramifications for violating the policies are pretty steep. As you can see here, the fines are either going to be $23 million or 4% of annual revenue, whichever's higher. So that's why there's been so much discussion about this. And again, I just want to re-emphasize, when you're hearing about GDPR in this presentation, think about this as an opportunity to streamline compliance and security across the board, rather than waiting for a data breach to cause you to do that. And there are three real high-level principles when we're looking at GDPR as related to email. GDPR is a very, very big regulation. Email security is one piece of this that we're going to focus in on today. And the principles around email protection as it relates to GDPR, first off, is simply about having encryption in place. So whenever you are sharing personal data, that needs to be encrypted. The second concept here is privacy by design. And the idea of privacy by design is that you should not build your IT systems and your processes and then figure out how to incorporate strong privacy and data protection into those systems. Rather, you should be building all of these processes around a core commitment to privacy. So this applies to your technology. This applies to the ways that you share data. This applies to your internal IT processes. So it's a pretty wide-ranging concept, but it's one that most enterprises have started to bake into everything they're doing across the board from an IT perspective. And the last piece here is state-of-the-art security. GDPR defines state-of-the-art security as end-to-end encryption. And this is a concept we'll talk about a bit more later today. But one thing that these GDPR requirements are forcing people to realize is that oftentimes people hear email encryption and they don't really dig into the nuances involved there. And as we'll talk about in these next few slides, email encryption can mean a lot of things. And oftentimes email encryption excludes some really important capabilities that are mandated by GDPR and other compliance regimes. So another thing to realize when it comes to GDPR, most existing security approaches and technologies were built long before GDPR and long before a lot of the data breaches and compliance requirements that we see today. And as a result, these technologies have not built with that privacy by design concept in mind. As a result, a lot of them are really insufficient to help you solve your modern data protection needs. And you can see here that Gartner predicts 65% of data security buying decisions in 2018 will be driven by GDPR. The thing to note there is that a lot of this money is being spent on solutions that can't sufficiently solve these requirements. So it's really important when you're figuring out how to solve problems like GDPR and how to define your data protection policies, that you're not just buying the old legacy solutions on the market, that you really understand these requirements so that you can then match those requirements to the technical capabilities of the products out there. And these are some of those nuances that we're talking about when we think about email protection and data protection. We like to boil it down into four key parts, four key things you need to evaluate whenever you're looking at a new tool. The first piece is the encryption itself. What type of encryption is occurring? How is that content being encrypted? The second piece is around key management, which fundamentally dictates the power of that encryption, is who actually manages the keys performing the encryption. The third piece is access control. How do you know who can access your encrypted content? And how can you pull back or grant new access to recipients? And the final piece is audit. So really understanding who has accessed your data and when they've accessed that data. The first thing we'll look at is encryption itself. When we talk to customers, we sense a lot of confusion around email encryption. The first thing people often say is, I thought Gmail was encrypted. I thought my email already was encrypted. And it's true, it is encrypted. Most email solutions to date, like Gmail, Microsoft Outlook, use what's called SSL or TLS-based encryption by default. And what this does is this encrypts your content as it is transmitted to different servers and recipients. So think of TLS as an encrypted pipe. So it will encrypt your content in transit. However, it's not actually encrypting the data itself. And you can't guarantee that your content is going to be remaining encrypted, because TLS only works if the receiving server has also implemented TLS. So again, this is an encrypted transmission. It's an encrypted pipe. We're not actually encrypting the data. The second type of encryption we'll talk about is portal-based encryption or legacy encryption. This is what most of the email encryption providers on the market are selling. And this adds additional security on top of basic TLS that you'll find in Gmail. But even with these portal-based approaches, you're not encrypting the data itself. You're using methods like TLS to transmit data through secure pipes and eventually storing that data on a portal-based server where recipients will then go to access that content. So you may get emails from your doctors or your banks where you need to log in to a different portal to view these encrypted messages. That's what these portal-based methods are providing. The final method, the one that GDPR defines as state-of-the-art, and the type of encryption that we provide here at Virtu, is end-to-end encryption. This means that you are wrapping and encrypting those actual emails before they ever leave your device. So this means that third parties never get access to that unencrypted content. So this is the most secure method for email encryption that you can find and implement. And again, this is really the gold standard that most security leaders are implementing across their organizations, given the fact that existing solutions aren't really protecting that data, and they're not really enabling you to manage who can access that content. So I mentioned that encryption key management was really important. The way I like to think about encryption key management is think about your emails and your data. Think of those like a car. Like you have a very valuable sports car that you want to protect. That's your data. And your cloud provider, like Google, they're pretty much, think of them like the valet. So you're pretty much trusting this third party to store, protect, take care of your data. So even if you lock your data up, you lock your car up, and you feel like it's safe, if your valet attendant has the keys needed to unlock that car, or your cloud provider has the keys needed to access that data, it has to make you reconsider, how safe is that data really? How safe is that car going to be if someone else controls the keys protecting it? And so when you think about key management, it's really important to focus on three main concepts: security. And when we think about security, you need to think about who actually has these keys. Does my cloud provider have the keys protecting my data? Does another vendor have them? Where are they stored? Because that level of security ties directly to a lot of compliance regulations, like GDPR being one. Your company might also work with partners who don't want their data being accessed by third parties. They might not want their data being shared in certain regions. And key management and the security around that is what allows you to facilitate that and meet those requirements. Key management also helps dictate how easily these tools are going to protect your emails. You want a solution that's going to automate these key exchanges, because you don't want to have to spend time administering keys to your end users. You don't want your end users spending time exchanging keys with their recipients. And the last piece I'll mention here is that you want key management that enables you to manage access to these keys. Because if you're managing access to the keys protecting your emails and other data, then you can manage access to the data itself. And that's one thing we'll talk about on this slide here. Access control is the ability to pull back emails after they've been sent, after they've been read. It's the ability to set expiration dates, to disable forwarding. And a good email security solution should have these capabilities built in by default. Access control, I've used it in the past to help cover up some embarrassing emails, but more importantly, as it's related to security, this is what's going to help you remediate data breaches if they happen. This is what's going to help you avoid hefty compliance fines. It really gives you some power to control your emails and other content, even after they've left your device, your organization, even after they've left the G Suite domain as a whole. And the last thing I'll touch on here is audit. So again, similar to access control, you need to know when your content has been read. You need to be able to track where these emails are traveling. So encrypting content is one piece of the puzzle, but knowing where that content has traveled and always being in control of that content is really the second piece to keep an eye on. So I'll wrap things up here before passing over to Trevor to actually show you what Virtu looks like and how we implement a lot of these concepts by just giving you a high-level overview of what Virtu is. So we are Google's only recommended data protection product for G Suite. So as we'll show you here, we provide end-to-end encryption for Gmail and other platforms. We also give you that critical ability to pull back access to your data and also set policies to enforce when data protection is applied and when certain privacy policies are applied. And what's really important about Virtu, one is that it's super easy to use, as Trevor will show you. And two is that this is a solution that prevents third parties from accessing your unencrypted content. It prevents Virtu from accessing your content, and it prevents Google from accessing your content. So when you're thinking about compliance and really stepping your security game up a level, Virtu is the type of solution that's going to help you with that. And I will kick things over to Trevor right now, who can help show you how we do that.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. And good afternoon, everybody. So as Matt mentioned, one of the main blockers to organizations introducing a tool to protect their data like this is the complexity. It's really hard to get these set up and very hard for end users to use. And so Virtu's mission has been to introduce a tool that allows you to both secure and control your data in a very seamless, easy to approach way. And so how we're doing that within G Suite is just via a Chrome extension. You can see I have this little Virtu logo up here, and we've added this gray Virtu bar to my email. So I'm going to throw an attachment on this email and show you what sending a Virtu email looks like. So all I need to do to enable encryption is toggle this switch. We're now protecting this email. Even as a draft, this email is protected, as is the attachment. We've just generated a brand new set of AES 256-bit encryption keys that will be applied to this message. So what we'll do is send to someone in my organization who uses Virtu, as well as someone outside the organization who does not use Virtu. And before we send this, I'll touch on a few of the other security controls that we give you, because again, we want to control what happens to this data after I send it. So I can disable forwarding, I can add an expiration, and I can even watermark that PDF, which is going to splash the recipient's email address across that document. So to send, we just go ahead and click Secure Send, and we'll encrypt that message and send it out. We've just sent our first secure email. So before we look at the recipient experience, I want to touch on that end-to-end encryption that Matt's been talking about and show you really what it is that Virtu is doing here. So this is the plain text of the message that was just sent off to Google. And as you can see, we're just looking at ciphertext here. None of that original data that I actually put in there is present in this email. So even before it leaves my computer, we're wrapping it up in this secure container and never exposing that data to any third parties. Now we'll jump into what that looks like as a recipient. So again, if I use Virtu, that's going to arrive in my inbox just as any other email would. And again, via this Chrome extension, we'll decrypt that message automatically in the inbox. So Virtu to Virtu, seamless. It's largely no different than sending another email, and I can reply here and reply secure. And there we go. Now, Matt mentioned that a lot of the times that you're sharing data, you need to send it outside of your organization. You're not just communicating this stuff back and forth with your team members. It needs to go out to someone at another company or a private individual who may or may not have Virtu installed. So how do we handle that scenario? We don't want to force them to install any software. That's a bit of a burden to ask. So instead, what we're going to do is load that in the browser for them. So unlike some traditional approaches that you may be used to, we're not going to require any sort of username and password to be created. We're instead going to rely on their existing credentials. So I'll click Unlock Message here and open up Virtu's Secure Reader in my browser. And I'm going to select my email address. And then I'm going to use my existing Google credentials to log in. If I was a Microsoft user, I could use those credentials. And if not, we're just going to send a quick email to verify ownership of the mailbox. But at no time do I need to create a password that, to be honest, I'm going to forget before the next time I receive one of these messages. So since I'm a Gmail user, I'm going to log in with Google here. We're using my trusted identity provided by Google to grant access and then decrypt this message right here in the browser via JavaScript web app. Here's that PDF that I'd watermarked. So you'll see the ability to download has been restricted and my email address is added all over this document. So if I were to then leak this out, it would be clear who was the source of that leak. I can also send a secure reply here without installing any software, allowing that true end-to-end encryption communication without any additional installs. There we go. So I'll jump back to the sent mailbox again and look at this email that I sent earlier. Now, we have a few features here that you don't see in the normal Gmail sent folder up in the top right. So we have those same security controls I mentioned earlier, which we can add after the fact. So if I decide that I would like to disable forwarding, even though I've already sent this email, I can still do so. I can add an expiration, or I can just revoke that email wholesale. Say I send it to the wrong person, they shouldn't have access to this data after all. We're just going to remove their access. So now if I return as this user and click that unlock message, we're going to see something a little bit different. So Virtu has now revoked my access to the decryption keys for this message, and I'm not able to view that content. We can also take a look here. Has that content been viewed by anybody with these read receipts shown here with the green envelopes? So that's the end user experience. And if I want to apply encryption to a message, I certainly can. But as an administrator, you also want the ability to dictate what kind of data is able to leave your environment and who's able to send what data. And so we can accomplish that in a couple different ways. So again, we'll send an email here to 2 users. But this time, I'm moving quickly. I'm a busy guy. I've just had lunch. I'm a little tired. So I forget that I should be enabling Virtu for this. So what happens then? Well, I'll click send. And Virtu is going to identify that there is sensitive content in this email based upon the rules that the administrator has set up. So here we're displaying a warning saying, looks like you've got a social security number. Would you like to send that encrypted? Which I can do, or I can send unencrypted. We also give you the ability to force an encryption event without giving any options, as well as a few other actions that can be taken. What we found that's really cool about this warning option is that it's a great way to educate your users on how they're sending data and what they're communicating. If you're using a more invisible approach, they may not be aware that the data that they send should be protected. So this is a great way to teach your users, hey, here's some information that you're sending. You need to be careful about this. And so we'll secure send there. Now we're going to jump in and show you how we create those rules a little bit. So we give you some out of the box that will look on some common text patterns for social security numbers, credit cards, as well as keywords. So you can add any keywords you'd like in addition to the ones that we've given you. And you can also customize rules based on who you send to. So if you're communicating with a bank or a hospital, it's likely that that data is going to be sensitive, and maybe you just want to have it be encrypted every time. Finally, we have the ability to do custom rules. So using just if then else logic, we can take a look at various fields within the email for the content they contain, and then take several actions. So in addition to the warn, encrypt that I mentioned, we can also add a BCC if an administrator should be a part of that conversation, or we can remove attachments if there's something that you don't want leaving the environment. So again, giving you very fine-grained control over the data that your users are sending. And then finally, it's important, again, for an administrator to know what data is being sent by their users and who's accessing that data. So we're going to give you an audit trail of all the secure emails created by your team. Now, these go on sort of in perpetuity, so you can go back and look at all the emails that have been sent, who has access, and who else they were sent to. So for example, this email is from over 2 years ago, but we still have the ability to revoke, add expiration dates, disable forwarding, and monitor who this email has been forwarded on to. So we can see that I'm a secure forwarded to Brett here. Brett then forwarded to his personal account, it looks like, who then forwarded on to some more people. Now, I'm not familiar with who this is, so I'm just going to revoke access simply to this user and not the rest, because I'm comfortable with everyone else having those. And then I would just save my changes there. There we have access has been revoked to that user. So to wrap up here, what Virtu, again, our mission is to really provide a simple, easy way for you and your team to control and secure your data that you're sharing via email without having to jump through a lot of the hoops that traditional approaches make you use. So with that, I will turn it back over to Emily.
Thank you so much. We do have some questions that are coming in here, and I'd like to just remind you, if you had any questions along the course of the presentation, you can leave them for us in the questions box in your GoToWebinar panel, and we will get to them. So the first question is, does Virtu only work if the recipient uses Virtu as well?
Great question. That is not the case. So Virtu can be used to send to both Virtu users and non-Virtu users, who again are going to use this secure reader experience to read that message. Now my access is revoked here, of course, but that's how they would do it. So no need to install any additional software.
Excellent, thank you. Another question, how is the key managed with this solution?
Yeah, so Virtu is going to act as the key manager with our software as a service. So you don't need to host or transmit any keys. Virtu is going to take care of that for you. With that said, we do also offer the option for customers to host their own keys on premise with our customer key server for an added level of control.
Okay. The next question is, do we have the ability to change the template in the secure reader?
You do, yes. So one of the big lessons that a lot of people teach their users these days with email is if you get an email with a link, be a little bit careful about clicking that. So what we do to mediate that is allow you to customize that entire template with your colors, your brand's logo, your contact information, your help desk phone number, anything we can do to make that email clear that it's coming from you as a legitimate source.
Okay, next question. I heard Google is discontinuing its support for Google message encryption from Zix. How do you differ from that product?
Sure. Yeah, so Zix has been one of those legacy tools that we talk about that's portal based. So while it's a little bit seamless while sending from a Zix user to a Zix user, once you start sending outside your organization to someone who doesn't use Zix, the experience gets a little bit trickier. They're going to force you to create a username and password that you'll then need to log into every message you receive from Zix from then on out, which we generally hear creates a lot of help desk tickets to the sender's organization because nobody stores or remembers those passwords. Zix is also a gateway approach. So while Virtu is end-to-end encryption, encrypting on the device before it ever even leaves, Zix is instead going to let the plain text go out to a Zix server where they then host it for your recipients to log into and view.
Okay, thank you. I've got another question. Are there network performance considerations to be aware of when using Virtu?
There aren't really. So one of the neat things about Virtu's encryption is that we are simply encrypting the email text before it leaves. So all that's really happening is we're sending a different type of data set through the normal email channels. It won't increase file size. It's simply just going to be a blob of ciphertext that's no larger than a regular email. So the burden is not introduced on the network.
Excellent. I have another question here is, please explain the end user experience for recipients, including the different browsers and email providers.
Sure. So yeah, one of our main goals with Virtu is to make sure that the recipient experience is seamless and consistent across whatever platform you're receiving on. So that experience is going to be agnostic of email provider. So you can send to Google, Yahoo, Lotus Notes. If you have someone who's still using that, the experience is all going to be the same. They're going to click that unlock message link, and it will open up in their default browser. And the secure reader will load on any modern browser, which includes Chrome, Safari, Internet Explorer, Firefox, you name it. So recipient agnostic, that experience will be the same across the board.
Excellent. Thank you. Google supports revoking and expiring messages and disable forwarding through Gmail Confidential. How does Virtu compare? I think this might be a good one for Matt.
Yeah, I can take this one. There's still very unclear what exactly Gmail Confidential is going to be, but from our understanding, Gmail Confidential is more of a kind of consumer product for Gmail users to help manage who can control some of their content. But it's for users who want Google to manage access to their content for them. So Google's still going to have access to all this content. It's really like a consumer grade access control capability for certain emails, and it doesn't really add any additional security because it's not adding any encryption to that data itself. So it's not really sufficient for regulations and other corporate privacy requirements, but it might be a cool tool for you to use on your personal Gmail account if you're exchanging messages with friends and things like that.
Okay. I've got another question here. How are Google Drive assets like docs and sheets impacted by using Virtu, if at all?
Sure. So one of the neat things about Virtu's encryption technology is that it is object-based. So we're using a file format developed by one of our founders, Will Ackerley, called the Trusted Data Format, or TDF. The TDF can encrypt any type of data and can be stored anywhere because it is, again, just an object. With that said, the main focus that we've identified for businesses and the main risk area is email. So that's where our current products are focused. But with that said, I would keep an eye on the file encryption space throughout the rest of the year as well, without saying more than that. But
yeah, and I would also note that if anyone's going out to Google Next, we'd be happy to kind of give you a sneak peek at what we're doing in the file encryption space, and also can arrange that on a call. But definitely look out for some cool products coming down the line there.
Awesome, thank you. How does Virtu impact the use of Google Vault?
Another great question. Someone's thinking ahead here. Good question. So again, being end-to-end encrypted, Virtu is going to store all your emails encrypted when they're at rest. So that means if you are using Google Vault, those emails are going to be encrypted in Google Vault, which can make search a little bit difficult. So what we've done is actually developed a proprietary encrypted search technology that will allow you right within the Google Vault interface to search through your encrypted messages. So if you need to perform e-discovery or find an old email that the user has maybe deleted from their inbox, you'll still be able to retrieve those from Vault even if they're encrypted.
Excellent, thank you. If the email is in conversation mode, will the entire conversation be encrypted or only the message that Virtu was enabled?
So conversation mode is supported by Virtu, and all the messages will be encrypted. So We encrypt the message as well as the rest of the thread when you reply. And we also scan the rest of the thread with our DLP rules in case someone had sent something unencrypted previously in that thread that you then want to encrypt later on.
Great. Let me just see here. I do have one more question, and then I'm going to launch a poll really quick for everybody, and then we'll jump back to questions. So does the recipient have to jump through the same hoops every time they receive an encrypted email? I'm guessing they mean for people who don't use Virtu.
Right, they do not, and I'm glad you asked that because I didn't show that in the demo. But when someone authenticates their identity with Virtu, we're going to store a cookie in the browser that will persist until that cookie expires, usually 30 days for most browsers. So when you receive your next Virtu email and click unlock message, you'll be taken directly to the secure reader and see your content. We won't make you go through the login process again. So it becomes even more seamless the more you receive these messages.
Great, thank you. In the meantime, there are still some more questions coming in, but I'm just going to launch a quick poll here. We are interested in knowing if you'd like us to follow up with you directly. And I'll let this just run for a moment here, and then we'll hop back to it. Okay, thank you very much. And let me just jump back into questions. Okay, so the next question is, does Virtu Audit data integrate with Splunk?
Very good question. And that's a very big question that we get these days because as part of a security policy at a company, you need to be auditing and monitoring what's going on with your users. So this month, we are actually releasing our Virtu Zone reporting, which will export to a variety of SIM systems, including Splunk, that will give you a lot of insight into what's going on with your users and how they use Virtu. We'll be giving you information on when secure policies are created, when those emails are accessed, and the IP addresses for those events. So an example alert you could set up would be to look at policy access by location. You see an IP address that you don't recognize who's accessing a secure email, you know that you now need to go in and revoke access to that email or take another action. So yes, Virtu can indeed export these reports to Splunk and other SIM systems.
Great. Let me see. Can an administrator revoke messages on behalf of their users?
Absolutely. So through that same dashboard experience, as an administrator, you can again look at the secure emails that your team has created and look at who has access to them. If you think that someone who currently has access should not, you have the ability to revoke that user's access or revoke all users' access.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And I do, we are going to wrap up momentarily because we are hitting time soon. I do have one more poll. We're just interested in knowing and making sure this talk was relevant to you today. So I'm just going to launch this now. And then we'll check for any last questions you may have. So if you have those, please leave them for us now and we'll hop back to those in a moment. And all right. Okay, and just sharing the results back. It looks like it was definitely a relevant talk for everybody. So that's great. Thank you so much. I'm just going to hop back to my questions panel here and see if there's any last questions. Nope, I think we're all finished. So we will wrap up and give you some minutes back to your day. I'm just going to hand it back over to David. Thank you. David, can you hear us?
Hi, Emily. Yes, I can. Thank you very much. So thanks, everyone, for joining us. Again, as you can see on the slide, if you want to talk more about Virtu, we can help you with that. Simply email me, david.knox@agosto.com. More than likely, you have my email in your history at some point. So thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Have a great day.